to our next and final debate. It's about the city's powers. So on the right-hand side, we have the priorities debate we just had. You vote with a blue dot to see if people shifted. On the left-hand side, we have the next debate. Be it resolved that to achieve its priorities, the city should have increased powers from the province. Please vote with a green dot to share your initial position. As before, I invite people to come to the front of the room to be debaters. Those of you who were debaters, feel free to stay. Please let other people in if they want to come in. We'll have the next debate in just about 2 minutes. Sorry. This is the agree, is to my right. This is the disagree. So should the city have more powers? The agree side over here, disagree over here.
Can we bring chairs to the office?
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We are on the third and final debate of the day. The resolution is be resolved that to achieve its priorities, the city should have increased powers from the province. Every member of the public is welcome to participate. Come to the front table if you can. Sit at a microphone, and you'll have a chance to speak. To my right, we have the agree side. They're getting ready to deliver their opening comments. The disagree side will deliver the second round of comments, and we'll go back and forth and have a vigorous debate. And just a reminder, I do have city staff present to answer questions. We don't want you fighting about facts. We want you fighting about disagreeing, debating about ideas. So, is my agree side ready to begin? For those who are unfamiliar with the room, you have to press the button on your microphone when it's lit up you're live. And I will be timing you. I ask that you limit your comments to about 2 minutes, but I'm not going to be really rigid about that. Agree? Are you ready? All right. Agree? Please begin. You have 2 minutes. Go first? Go.
Okay, hello, it's Vincent again, back for the debate. So essentially here in this case, I wanted to bring up a very interesting point. So I read a book a while ago. It was called Mayors Out of Control, something like that. It's basically a run-through of mayors of various Canadian cities who've been subject to scandal. Rob Ford, there's a mayor of Halifax, Larry O'Brien in Ottawa, all these things. And if you just took that, read the first few chapters, you would think, why the heck would we give municipal government more power? But his argument, the author's argument, was that the reason these sort of characters bubble to the surface in municipal politics in Canada is because Canadian cities don't actually have the powers that they need to serve their citizens. So Toronto is home to 2.5 million people. We're one of the larger jurisdictions in Canada. The mayor of Toronto, maybe or maybe not, is the largest directly elected position in Canada. So in the sense that if you vote in a federal election, you vote for your MP. You don't vote for Justin Trudeau or Stephen Harper. You vote for your MP, whereas 2.5 million people can vote for the mayor of Toronto. So we're not infants. And giving the municipal government power means that you might actually have less scandals at the local level. Also, good things happen when you give powers to local governments. Look at the United States. The federal government in the United States has been gridlocked for years. Obviously, now we have the reign of King Trump. But even before that, in previous administrations, you had complete gridlock between the two parties. While that's been happening, municipal governments in the U.S., which in many cases have more powers than Toronto, have been doing great things. So, for example, minimum wages. Certain U.S. cities have the powers to set local minimum wages. They have done so. Toronto does not have this power, for example. Some U.S. cities and larger jurisdictions have the ability to create local sales taxes to fund infrastructure. So the very impressive expansion of Los Angeles, of all places, public transit system is a result of these local initiatives that allow for municipalities to fund things greater than the federal government or state governments would do. So, in conclusion, look at the examples around the world when you give powers to local governments. You have less scandal. You have local governments doing some very interesting and innovative things to serve their citizens. And we should do the same thing here in Toronto to give us the powers to actually govern 2.5 million people.
Okay.
Bigger than Saskatchewan.
Thank you very much. It's a great closing argument. Bigger than Saskatchewan. All right. To the disagree side,
But hey, I like Saskatchewan.
could I have an opening comment from the disagree side? Who's nominated?
I think it's me.
All right.
In defense of Saskatchewan and other great places in this country,
I like Saskatchewan too.
our complaint about the resolution is, though the folks on this side of the table have no objection to the notion that Toronto should have increased powers. It is a large government. It does represent a large number of people. It has a complex mandate that requires a lot of flexibility. It doesn't actually need that to achieve its priorities. The City of Toronto currently has a number of powers that could generate substantially more revenue. They could levy a parking tax that KPMG tells us would bring in $200 million a year. They could levy a liquor tax that KPMG tells us would bring in $120 million a year. We haven't been using those powers. We haven't even been using our property tax capacity at the rate even of inflation. The city manager's report last summer showed that we were about 6 points below the rate of inflation over the last 6 years in terms of our levying of property tax. That's another $150 million a year just using the tools we have. I've rattled off $500 million in things that we could fund using the powers that we've already got. The problem we have is not the powers that we have, but the decision to choose to use them well. We haven't done that on the revenue side, and we're not doing it well on the spending side. We spend $1 billion a year operating a police force, and we should invest heavily in community safety, and we should invest heavily in making sure that our streets are places where people feel comfortable and secure. But I'm not sure that the best intervention for people in a mental health crisis is 2 armed men in uniform. I'm not sure that the best solution to domestic violence is 2 armed men in uniform. I'm pretty sure that there are there's lots of evidence that shows that the interventions that are most appropriate are appreciably less expensive and usually involve people trained not in physical conflict but in social supports. We also are going to spend about $1.2 billion extra to put the Gardiner Expressway on stilts instead of on the ground. That is thousands of units of affordable housing that we are choosing not to build so we can put a road on stilts. So yes, the City of Toronto probably does deserve more powers than it has, but it could achieve billions and billions of dollars worth of the priorities it currently has just by choosing to use the powers that it has right now to invest in the things that matter to communities.
Okay, thank you very much. Turning it back over to the agree side. Who's up next to rebut, introduce new information? It's up to you. You have 2 minutes.
Yes, hello, my name is Paul. On certain categories, I must, sad to say, agree with Sean. That so much in taxes could be raised, but why not be raised for the province of Toronto rather than the city of Toronto. Now, you look at rights in general. Haven't cities around the world become city-states? Therefore, why couldn't, in that context, Toronto become a city province? If we have more people than a lot of provinces, that basically proves the point, doesn't it? But if not only that, you look at the TTC. Why is it that why is it that 75% of all money raised comes from the fare box? Shouldn't that money stay in Toronto? But shouldn't Toronto have the right to go to the provincial and federal government and get funding like every other city in North America? Why are we different? Well, you know, folks, you look at the word different, it could mean, why are we prejudiced against? By having our own autonomy, defining who and what we are, and setting our own standards, we become a part of Canada, a province, but we also remain who and what we are. And what's wrong with that, ladies and gentlemen?
Thank you very much. It's a question of money and a question of identity. There are a lot of dimensions to this. So somebody from the disagree side ready to step forward? Yep. Begin. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm Mike Creek, and that was very nice, Paul. I agreed with a lot of that. I want to tell you a little story about of uploading of costs from the city. So over the last 12 or so years, the city has had the uploaded costs of Ontario Works completely switched back over to the province of Ontario. That's probably where it belonged in the first place, but it's approximately $1.5 billion accumulated over that period of time. So when you go to the province and say the city needs more money for social issues, they say, well, we had an agreement with them. They determined they didn't want to reinvest that money into priorities of housing and transportation, but they decided that they could keep the tax base low at, you know, around 2% on the backs of poor people. So you have to be really careful about when you're setting priorities, because they're often political. They're political choices that are made, and they're not made always in the best interest of community. They're made often in the best interest of somebody who is looking to get reelected. That's how things work in the city. That's how things work in the province, and we sort of have to accept that. What we need to have is more transparency on the transfers and how those things are negotiated now between the provinces and the federal government and the city. Those things are done behind closed doors without really any input from citizens here in Toronto, and how they'll have a lasting impact on building a city that we all are sort of dreaming to have. So those things are really important. So I don't think that you can really go to ask somebody else for powers when you haven't used all the powers that you already really have, and they send you packing. You know, I often think of John Tory as, you know, going cap in hand down to Queen's Park to try to get more money. You can only do that for so long before people will call your bluff on it and say no. And we found that out with the road tolls. So thank you.
Thank you. Moving back to the agree side, do we have a speaker? Oh, and just for the sake of the room, you don't have to be at the table to speak. If the other people want to jump in, come to a seat with a microphone and wave to me, and I'll work you into the dialogue. So we're going to go here and then back to the front. But we have...
Yeah. So I hear what they're saying, where we do have a lot of tools that aren't being used. The question is, why are they not being used, right? A lot of them aren't palatable to the people of Toronto. So ultimately, when you say they're doing it for political reasons, it's the people that vote. So you can't raise property taxes because our mayor won't get elected. That means that the people of Toronto won't vote for a property tax increase above the rate of inflation. If they did, we wouldn't be here. Everything would be fine. But the people of Toronto will not vote for that issue. So how? It's just not going to work. So we need to come up with a revenue tool to pay for everything that we all probably in this room agree for. And the only way to do that is to ask for more powers from the province. And that's the reality until there's some demographic shift or an enlightenment that occurs between the, various divides within the city. It's not going to work. So the only solution when I look at this problem is to find another way. And the toolbox we've been given was the toolbox that was given a long time ago. And the world has changed fundamentally. Our funding models are significantly more complex. There's a lot of stuff you can do with the private sector. Not all of them are great, but some of them are. And we should be exploring the ones that do work. Not every company is a soul-sucking corporation that is out to make a buck. There are some progressive ones that perhaps, for example, some of our pension fund stuff and different companies that have a vested interest. They are, for example, pensions are owned by Canadians effectively. So it's Canadians' money working for Canadians. So it's just, we need to find a better way.
Thank you very much. And moving to the front of the room.
I'm on this side of the room. I have to say that I feel that a discussion for asking for more powers is deflecting from the real issue of what we have today. The new powers, some of the new powers are even changes in the Constitution. And I really believe that if we want to go forward with that argument, it needs to be a whole discussion of going back to the BNA Act and a rewriting of how and where the funding models belong across Canada in all the municipalities. This is not just a Toronto issue. If we get more powers from the province, and there's very limited ones province can give us, and some of them even mean sharing of agreements with the federal government, all of which are very, very difficult to obtain. I administered some of the federal sharing agreements at one time. They're extremely difficult. I just think this whole discussion is taking away from what revenue tools do we have, how can we maximize them, how can we deal with our tax base, how can we raise taxes, and how can we fund today. I don't disagree with the conversation should be out there, but it's not an easy conversation, and it's a conversation that starts at the federal government and a change in the whole funding model for Canada and in each level. And we're going back right to Confederation.
So I think I just heard a bit of an argument for fundamental constitutional reform. Yeah. And I use that as a jumping off point to remind you that there is a Your Best Idea section in the workbook. If you have really big ideas, please, I want to make sure you capture all these ideas, get them in the workbook. We want to hear them.
Just a question to clarify on that. So I think what your position was that we have a problem on the ground now. We need to use the tools we have now to fix what we have now, because if we get into a constitutional argument, it's going to be many, many, many years before it gets resolved.
I started in tax in 1971 after the Carter Commission, which was a fundamental change in how we taxed individuals in Canada. And that's my starting in tax. I actually practiced income tax on the old Income Tax Act before the Carter Commission and after the Carter Commission. And if anybody wants to do some research on the Carter Commission, it was in fact a very cutting-edge study of taxation, income taxation in Canada at its time. And it was very revolutionary, and it was recognized throughout the world.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to start coming to closing arguments. I see Let's do, I'm gonna set up who's gonna speak. I've Gideon here, 1, 2, and at the back, you want to speak as well? 3, 4. How many do we have on this side? 1, 2. We're okay with 4 and 2. It's reasonably balanced. We'll start here and just work our way around the room.
Sure, I'll just be really brief. I agree with a lot of stuff that folks have said, especially what Sean said, but I think there is another consideration, and I think that is that if Toronto pushed for more powers, it might embolden other municipalities in Ontario and perhaps across the country to think in terms of getting additional powers. I mean, if we got additional powers, the city of Ottawa, the city of London, Windsor, other major cities in the province may say, why shouldn't they as well have these additional powers? And I think rightly, they should have those additional powers. And the positive side, it seems to me, is that if we had a whole group, a whole constituency of municipalities across the province that were demanding more powers, it would be mutually reinforcing. And so Toronto, there would be a better case for us to get more powers, and it would broaden that out across the province. And I think that would only be a good thing if municipalities right across right across Ontario had more powers in terms of building transit or housing or any of the things that we need. So I think Toronto could set a really important precedent for other municipalities.
Thank you very much. Back to the disagree side. Closing comments?
Yeah, so I would like to start off by first of all saying that when you talk about powers, therefore that also means talking about the powers to make decisions. So then therefore, since we have many people who are actually moving in and moving out of Toronto daily, be it for work or be it for something else, I think that it would be a bad idea for us to be downloading some of this decision-making powers from the province and from the federal government down to the municipal government. I think that because many of our cities and many of the issues that we face are all interconnected, so then therefore that's why the decision-making powers should stay at the provincial level or the federal level. Secondly, when you're talking about giving more powers, that actually means giving them more responsibility as well. And as some of my colleagues here on this side have said, the city of Toronto definitely struggles when it comes to implementing new tools to raise money. So then therefore that's why I would be against downloading these powers to the city, because they will likely take on more responsibility without actually having the funding to back it up. Lastly, I would also like to speak about the process. And after that, when you look at decisions that are made at the provincial or made at the federal level, they're actually relatively straightforward in the sense that the premier comes up with an idea, passes it on to cabinet, followed by them voting on it, and after that the decision is carried forward on, versus looking at it here at the city level, whereas we've actually been voting on, say, the Scarborough subway time and time again, and after that things don't actually get done. So then therefore that's why I would say that we should keep things at the provincial level, so then therefore things get done more quickly and actually, or we can see some results here on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have 3 speakers on this side and 1 on this. I'm going to have 2 speakers from the agree side, then 1 from disagree, 1 from agree. So would you like to be next? Thank you.
I think I want to say 2 things. One is city do have some power to touch, new revenue too. But the thing is, city do not exercise that power. I don't know why. Maybe they're afraid that they will offend somebody. For the next election, I might not get elected. Okay, that's my assumption. Maybe it's true. Second, I think not just city. I think, like what I want to say is, Federal did give a lot of money to province. But the thing is, the money up to province, it did not come to the pocket of the people in the city. So in that case, city had no power to exercise that funding. Neither did the federal. Federal give a lot of money to province. Federal had no. Province had to accountable to the federal about how the money they spend. But federal don't have a say to the province how they use that money. And a lot of time, like the transit, federal already give a lot of money to transit. Province did not use that money, and some money, I didn't say a lot of money, some money to the pocket to help with the poor people. But most of the money was used in the infrastructure, like metrolink, all this blah, blah, blah. What's that going to do with the low income? We don't use like GO Train, anything like that, okay? And so I think maybe the basic thing, the key thing is further had to think about maybe changing the law that make the province, they have a say in how province use the money. So it will be benefit to the people, not just all this infrastructure. I mean, infrastructure is good, but how they're going to help to reduce poverty to the city.
All right. Thank you very much. I have two more speakers on this side. Who wants to go first? In the back row? Closing statements. We're expected upstairs in a couple minutes, so I ask that you be pithy.
So I agree. Originally in Confederation, we were farm communities, and Toronto wasn't as significant in population. But when you're looking at what Toronto and Vancouver means to the overall population, I think it has to be structured slightly different. Because when you go back to the province, they have to win the voters, and they have this hinterland of communities that do not have the same level of, or they do not have the same priorities as somebody in the city. You can see it when you see who we vote for federally. It's completely a different dynamic within the city, especially within the centers, as to who are getting the vote. When you get outside of the city centers, you're seeing more blue areas. And that's really telling you that the priorities outside of the city are completely different than what we see as a priority. Toronto means so much as far as a percentage of the population for the entire country that it doesn't make any sense anymore to have it structured just as any other city. It has different priorities. Most immigrants come into Toronto or into Vancouver, and it has different things that it has to support. They don't go up to Peterborough to live. They don't go up to Lindsay to live. They don't need the same kind of funding as we do. And it's difficult when you go to the province, and you saw it with the toll highway, for them to actually prioritize what the 416 needs, because they're worried about their votes in the 905. So maybe you can't go back. I agree, you can't go back and open up the Constitution, but when they were doing the Constitution, it was a completely different dynamic. But there is ways that could help further funding or empowering the two major cities in Canada, and I think they have to be looked at, and if they aren't looked at, they will never happen. And Toronto and Vancouver just keep growing and growing, and you know, Thunder Bays of the world are getting smaller and smaller, and it has to be done differently.
Okay, thank you very much. Closing comment from the disagree side.
So the fundamental view about the need for more powers is that we can't use the powers we've got right now, and so we need a different suite of them to be able to achieve our goals. And I just want to speak to both of those components. And the first is that we do currently have a lengthy list of powers that we have to raise the revenues that we need. It is a list that was generated by the City of Toronto. The powers on that list were given to the province of Ontario by the city as the tools that we wanted to use. We are currently using exactly one of those. There is no question that it would be better if the City of Toronto had income tax or had sales tax or had taxes that grew with the economy. But again, in order to achieve the priorities we have right now, we could be using those, and we're not. And if we got a longer list of things that the province gave us that the city named, there is not a whole lot of evidence to suggest that we would use those either, since we're not using the ones we currently have. The change that needs to be made is the will of council to choose to use the tools that it has at its disposal, whether it's the current list or a longer list or an even longer list. And I think the most disturbing part of all of this for me is the long-standing canard that the public will not stand for property taxes, property tax increase or any other kind of increase in taxation. In fact, every poll that's been done in the City of Toronto that contrasts cutting services with raising taxes favors raising taxes by a considerable margin. Only 4 years ago, the public was consulted as part of the core service review under Mayor Ford and asked did they want to cut services or raise taxes. The two top answers to that were raise taxes by 5% or raise taxes by more than 5%, with a tiny minority saying we need to cut taxes and cut services. The public is willing to increase our revenues. It's just council that isn't willing to make that choice.
Thank you very much. One last closing comment from the agree side.
Okay, so kind of like in my position last time, I found myself often many times agreeing with my so-called opponents across the, I don't want to say aisle, it sounds like parliament, but over there. So I just want to respond to that last comment there. I actually agree with you in a large sense. We do have a fair number of powers that council has chosen not to access through fear of some Ford Nation insurgency. I'm not sure. I'm from Scarborough. I actually think Ford Nation has kind of died off considerably. Scarborough people want to pay more taxes too. But one of the things that, one of the powers that Toronto does not have is to have a referendum on a sales tax. It's worked very, very well, even in so-called conservative jurisdictions in the United States, where the city's residents themselves have actually voted to tax themselves. And this is something that Toronto does not have. It can actually bridge our two sides here, because council doesn't want to impose a new tax because of the narrative that it's the government coming into your pocket. So how some of those U.S. jurisdictions have got around that is simply say to the citizenry, do you want nice things? You will vote to tax yourselves. So if we had that, we could actually come to an agreement here of accessing our...
Did we just achieve a resolution?
Can I propose a compromise, a unity resolution?
Yeah.
That is, council should have, the city should have more powers, and it should use the ones it has to achieve its priorities.
Yes.
All in favor? All right. That's official. That is a beautiful way to end this. I will point out that the agree side was up 8-2 when people before the debate. So please go back and vote with the blue dots to indicate your position now. We'll see if it's changed. I also...
Can we put the compromise resolution on the board?
I'm afraid it has no binding power, but I do encourage you to put it in your workbook. We've heard a lot here. We've done our best to capture it. Write everything down. Go online. Something comes up later. There are tools online to do this. And right now, I encourage you to go upstairs. We're going to have the closing panel, reflect on what we've learned, and we're going to hear from the big idea panel what the big idea takeaway was today. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And thank you very much.